Welcome to Financial Clarity, the podcast dedicated to helping service-based small business owners achieve financial success. Join us as we demystify financial concepts, get practical tips from seasoned entrepreneurs, and discover strategies to increase profit and value. Hannah Smolinski here. I'm the host of the Financial Clarity podcast, where I talk with successful entrepreneurs, financial experts, and leaders in the small business community. Past guests include Ben Wolf, where we discussed how it's possible to work with an outsourced COO, when it's a fit for a business and when it's not. And Nancy McClellan, also known as the dancing accountant, good friend of mine, who has a passion to help small business owners understand how their bookkeepers and CPAs should be working together for an overall better result for your business owners. So if either of those episodes sound interesting to you, please go ahead and check them out on your favorite podcast app. Clara CFO is a fractional CFO agency dedicated to supporting mission-driven B2B service companies. If you're looking to uplevel the financial strategy and leadership in your business in order to achieve your big goals, visit claracfo.com to learn more. I was introduced to today's guest from Mark Wainwright of Wainwright Insights. Mark is a fractional sales leader, and I interviewed him on the podcast not too long ago, a few episodes back. We had a great conversation about building a sustainable sales pipeline, so make sure if you didn't catch that episode to go back and catch it. But today's guest is Chuck McDonald. After 20 years in wealth management, Chuck left the corporate world, relocated to a sunnier place, and took the opportunity to create something on his own. Leveraging the experience of helping hundreds of families with their own retirements, Chuck advises business owners on exit planning activities, allowing owners to fully realize their goals and create a legacy for generations to come. Chuck, I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we were introduced and I was like learning more about you and what you do. And I was like, this is perfect because we have a lot of business owners that would like to eventually exit their businesses. So excited to pick your brain today.
Yeah, no, it's a big opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to know why you left corporate and financial planning to go into starting your own thing and doing what you're doing now.
Oh man. So I had a successful career as a financial advisor, and I think it just got to the point where I felt like I had done enough. And then on the personal level, my wife and I were looking to relocate out of our city. We became empty nesters around the same time. Everything just kind of all happened. And I had the opportunity to sell my practice back to my partners, which was, and at the time, it just ended up being a very attractive option. So then we just packed up and we moved south to a little bit more sunshine. But I left the financial advisory world with a real passion towards education and just seeing what was out there. And I knew I had energy and I knew I had a lot of expertise about how I could help people. And having worked with a lot of business owners through their retirements and helping them, create that last third of their life in the way that they wanted, I really got passionate about working with the business owner in that mindset. So I got my exit planning certification and kind of tying it into the financial advisory piece, just because I think, and you and I have talked about this, but a lot of business owners just really get attached to their identity with what they had done over the last however many years. Mm-hmm. And then having gone through an exit myself, where I tell people it's like I'm too young to retire. I've still got a lot of energy. I've still got some expertise and some things to share. Having gone through that, I feel like I've got something to offer to those business owners that are maybe looking for that next step as well. So I come with both the financial acumen and the understanding about business itself, but also I really personally love to focus on the personal side, because I think that is such an important aspect of, taking that exit in stride. And then, what do you actually do with that? I had a old colleague who used to say, because you don't want to retire from something, you want to retire to something. And I think that mindset makes all the difference. And that's really one of the reasons I got into it and want to help with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories about people, retiring and then 3 months later just going crazy. They're like, I can't do this anymore. Like, wait,
Right.
they didn't really have any kind of plan for what's the after.
Hmm.
And if you haven't been like practicing for that or kind of creating something for your future, then yeah, it's going to feel you could potentially feel very lost in that
Exactly.
time.
Yeah, for
Hmm.
sure.
So when you were kind of as you were approaching, well, I don't know if you were, well, I guess you saw the timeline of being an empty nester and you
Mhm.
were like, okay, the kids are going to be gone and we're trying to figure out what's next. Like, did you think that this might be a thing that you would start your own thing, or did the opportunity come up and you just decided to take it?
I actually looked for jobs like doing, you know, financial analysis or things like that. And I've dabbled in a few things. I actually worked at a winery for a little bit of time before our move. Just I like wine and I really got into
Yeah.
that. And it's just fun to be, kind of in that hospitality thing just for fun.
Hmm.
Um and then I just I don't know if you've ever done like a core values inventory.
Mm.
And one of the things that sits there for me is I really started to value my freedom. And
Yeah.
so that's, taking that is what really drove me to go with the entrepreneurship route. I have friends that have started successful businesses, and they'll always say, it's a big bet on yourself. And so taking that leap, it checked a lot of boxes. I could have that financial, the flexibility and the freedom. Because really leaving the industry when I did, it was really a decision to trade time for money.
Mm.
Um, but I am very, very comfortable with that. And every now and then I get a little like, oh, should I have done that? But overall, I'm so glad I did. And that's what pushed me in that direction. And I dabble with other things too. I teach at the local community college in the business school.
Yeah.
And so that it provides me a lot of balance in really being able to give back. I think after a successful career, there is something where people want to say, all right, well, what can I do to really help? As a financial advisor, you really, you're kind of helping the 1%. And there's a lot of financial
Mm.
advisors that are fighting for that.
Hmm.
And I remember during COVID, they said, it was very apparent to me that everybody that I was working with was going to be fine. They could afford to make financial mistakes, but so
Right.
much of the country cannot. And it started to become a passion project, at least on that side, to really, look at the education, and I think basic financial literacy and some of the things that we don't teach um, to high school age children, for example, I think would really move the needle on some of the
Mm.
issues that we have in this country when it comes to finances.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of the reasons that I think that things like podcasts and YouTube channels are so
Yeah.
powerful
Mhm.
is because they are totally free and
Right.
available to everybody. And
Yeah.
I think that we're living in a time that um, you know, for the people who maybe don't have the formal education, like there's a lot of education out there now. And, having conversations like this are super helpful. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And I totally resonate with your freedom value.
Yeah.
I like to say that I'm probably like unemployable at this point. Like I probably couldn't go back to being working for anybody else. So I'm just gonna have to be a entrepreneur for the rest of my life, I think.
Yep. Yep. I know the feeling. I know it for
I
sure.
think a lot of business owners can probably resonate with that too.
Oh, absolutely. But
Um,
what I do love that,
yeah,
because, it's like, oh, if I've got, free time on a Saturday afternoon, then, like we'll plop down and do a couple hours worth of stuff and prepare for the week.
yeah,
I love having that flexibility to be able to do the things
yeah,
that need to get done and on my timeline and no one else's.
yeah. I mean, I every Thursday morning I play tennis. Like,
Awesome.
from like 9:30 to 11, it's like prime work hours, but it's like very important for me. It's kind of like something
That's
that
great.
I do. It's very, very, it's good for my mental health and my physical health and all the things, but it's nice
Very
to have that
important.
freedom to be able to do that. Um, Well, let's see. Let's business owners I think are all the time like hearing about exit planning.
Mhm.
And but I think when we really are honest with ourselves, maybe we don't always know exactly what goes into exit planning,
Sure.
everything that goes into it. So I'm imagining that it's an umbrella that covers lots of different things. But I'd love to hear from you. You are a certified exit planning professional now. So what is exit planning in a good full description of it?
Yeah, no, your umbrella analogy is pretty apt. The way that we tend to think of it is it's an alignment of your business goals, your financial goals, and your personal goals all under one umbrella. And it's a process. It's a process that can take, I think typically when we're working with businesses, a lot of times, if they're coming to us 3 to 5 years before eventually planning some sort of an exit, then that tends to be a little bit of a sweet spot. But what we're really looking to do is to kind of come up with I'll use the analogy like if you're going to sell a house, when we relocated, we hired an inspector. They came in, they told us everything that was wrong with it, and we went through and fixed it up. And then when we went and sold the house, that was a very successful sale. We were able to get a
Hmm.
great price and it was a smooth close because there were no surprises. I think exit planning done right looks a lot like that.
Mm,
And so it starts with an assessment and an understanding of, all right, well, these are the things that we need to worry about. We're looking for things like customer concentration. Is a huge amount of your revenue come from one group, for
mm,
example, or one customer, because that could be a red flag for somebody acquiring.
yeah.
Uh, is the name on the door the owner? And if that person leaves, who's going to take over? And so you start this process of digging into the business and figuring out where the risks to a potential acquirer might sit.
Hmm.
And then you go through one by one, and it's a process where you take, these projects one at a time and start to work through. You're mitigating risk, you're dealing with maybe key person insurance or an unfunded buy sell agreement, and taking some of the risk out, and all the while working on things like profitability and value enhancement. We talk in the EPI, the Exit Planning Institute, which holds the SEPA certification. We talk a lot about value enhancement because while you're going through all these things, you're not only making the business more attractive, but you're potentially going through exercises that will increase the profitability of the business. And
Yeah.
there ends up being a multiplier effect.
Mm,
So, and it could be also re energizing for the employees and the management team that's there. I mean, maybe they were in some sort of a rut and you can
yeah.
start to move through this thing. Um, and then after those processes, get done and repeated, and you start working on the next thing and you start working on the next thing, then you're given a decision at regular intervals saying, all right, well, is now the right time to go to market? Or are we still working on some things? And then from there, it's a look at all the different options. A lot of people come in and say, well, I'm just going to sell it to a family member or
Mm.
a key employee. Well, have you had those conversations? Because sometimes, and I've heard a number of stories where, oh, I'm just going to sell it to my kid. And, turns out the kid doesn't want it.
Yeah.
Or they might not be good at it. And,
Right. Yeah.
they might be apt at running it into the ground, which
Hmm.
doesn't do anybody any favors. And so it's a real look of, everything that might be involved. And through the EPI, I mean, there's you can start to tap the specialists that are needed. For example, there's actually somebody that I have access to who does family dynamic planning.
Hmm.
Uh, like it's almost like a family counselor, and this is what they specialize in.
Interesting.
So they can actually sit down with a family and start to work through any of the conflicts before the business gets transferred and sold.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a multi-step, pretty complex process, but really just making sure that all those, the business is running right, uh, that it can pass due diligence, that the financial I should turn those off. That the
For those not watching on YouTube, we've got every now and then there, if you do certain hand gestures, things will happen on Zoom.
I'll try to stop the
We
fireworks.
got a thumbs up. So
Yeah, there you go. And then of course, and then the big part, which I've talked about, is, making sure that the business owner has, can exit and step out into something knowing that their business is going to be well taken care of, and that they personally can live out the rest of their years with a lot of satisfaction.
yeah. So multi faceted for sure. We've
Absolutely.
got like business operations, business finances. I'm sure there's revenue models, like how are you even earning that revenue? But behavioral as well, correct? Like even
Yes.
as you're thinking about exit planning, like how is the business owner, leading,
Mhm.
or can you speak to maybe some of that piece, the behavioral piece, or maybe the more like psychological piece of the
Oh,
planning stage?
yeah. Well, I was in talks with somebody last year. They did land development and custom construction, and the guy he was in his early 60s, but just having just a real hard time extricating himself. He goes, "I started this process 4 years ago, and this is all the farther I've gotten."
Mm,
But when you talk to him, I mean, he was the sales guy, and he was working 60 hours a week, and he
mm,
was in the weeds dealing with little bits of problems and things like that. So I think psychologically, there's some difficulty in delegation, letting go. He had two other people on his team identified to eventually take over the business, but they weren't, there was definitely some skills missing.
mm.
And I think that there's a tendency, especially if it's your baby, and he had run the business for 40 years, and his name was on the door. It's like, this is my baby, and it's
Yeah.
delegation, effective delegation, and
Yeah.
being able to let go is something that can be tough for a lot of people, and just having that identity wrapped up in what they're doing. So
Yeah.
that's certainly one thing, and I mentioned the retiring from something versus to something, that is, certainly one of the things. Is just, what are you going to do with your time when you have it all freed up? Because if you're working 60 hours a week doing this thing, and then you all of a sudden have an extra 60 hours a week to do nothing, what does that
Right.
look like? And when I was an advisor, it's like, I can tell you that people that were sitting in front of cable news all day worried about whatever, they were the ones that were not having great retirements.
Yeah,
So
that's not how I want to spend my retirement.
yeah, but
Watching the news.
the people that were volunteering or teaching or traveling or
Yeah.
had hobbies, and those are the people that were really, really happy and thankful that they left, and never looked back.
I think that that's interesting because like you have to get yourself to you I think that speaks to the fact that it isn't great to go from working a 60-hour all in your business, all consuming, to just all of a sudden retiring.
Mhm.
Because how do you even develop those interests if you're working 60-hour weeks?
Yeah.
Like, you're probably just crashing at the end of every day and you're exhausted and you don't have time to like pick up a hobby or even think about, oh, I want to teach a college class or
Mhm.
think creatively. I think you have to give yourself space to even think creatively on what I
Right.
want to do in the future. So, like that kind of slow, how can I start to unburden myself
Mhm.
with maybe some of these responsibilities? And that goes to value creation and
Right.
building your business, right?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
I'm in the process of kind of reducing my CFO workload and becoming more heavily in like sales and marketing for my
Mhm.
business and kind of a little bit more in the like visionary quote unquote seat for those who are in the EOS jargon. And I can see it how I'm starting to create more creativity time.
Mm.
But the benefit of that too is that that means that other team members are actually doing the important work of serving clients and making sure the operations are running and everything like that. So it's twofold benefit. I am getting more creative time to be able to do other things and to even just like think more forward in the business. But then the business is actually operating without me in a
Right.
lot of ways. So I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a win-win. So I want that
Totally.
for everybody.
Totally.
It's a
Well, you
process. I haven't arrived, but it's a process.
well, you hit on something too. I mean, we talked about core values. Another one of mine is continuous learning. Like
Mm,
I love to dabble. So I taught yoga for a while. I play the guitar. I told you, like, I worked at a winery. I mean, it's just I'm always, especially when I knew this transition was coming,
hmm.
I really committed to being, a yes for anything that came my way. Oh, I'll
Yeah.
give that a try.
Yeah.
Why not? And you might really, really find something. And, I always kind of thought in the back of my head, I would love to be a teacher. And, well, hey, look, COCC had an online application. You only need a master's degree. Okay, fine. So, threw my hat in the ring, and that's been incredibly rewarding. So I'm working with kids now, and I kind of say it's like I think that maybe I'm the only one who's given them a real shot in the in the recent past, and it's been
Mm,
so rewarding to have that, and I learn a lot from them too. It's been
yeah.
a lot of fun.
That's super cool. Um, so if we're like, we've got all sorts of different business owners listening,
Mhm.
in, different stages of business. Some have been, fairly new, some have been established for many years.
Mhm.
If they are considering an exit
Mhm.
as their plan for their business, do you think you could give us maybe some things to think about if they're maybe like 10 years away, 5 years away, 3 years away, or whatever those timestamps might look like? Just some
Yeah.
things for them to kind of practically take away from this at maybe some different stages.
Yeah, 10 years away is that's an awful long time.
Yeah.
Um I think, if you're that far away to thinking about an exit, maybe you're not really thinking about an exit, but I'm a big fan of operational systems, making sure that things, you know, work, because you might get an unsolicited offer. I mean, who
Hmm.
knows? You might be approached by somebody. And if your systems are a mess, then it's a scramble. And you might be just attracting somebody who's trying to lowball you because they know your systems are a mess.
Right.
So, I've always been a big fan of just making sure that you come out the gate doing it right.
Yeah.
So that's probably, if you're that far out, um, you know, work your business, work it right, grow, find the market niches that work for you.
Hmm.
Um, having an attractive market niche is actually something that potential acquirers love. If you've got a secret sauce or a special way of doing something or a special process or product, then that gives you a leg up.
Hmm.
When you're coming into 5 years, and if you're really starting to think that, this is where I want to go, um, keep on that. Um, it's probably not too early for an assessment to have somebody come in and, maybe do a little what I would call pre due diligence to look around and see where some of those risks are. Um, if you've got partners, making sure that there's, the first step to a lot of what um, we do is eliminating risk.
Mm.
It's like, yeah, we want to grow value, we want to grow profitability, we want to do, look at new markets and things like that. But the first one is really risk management, making sure uh, that your key people are properly insured, that you've got contingency plans in place if you were to lose somebody or somebody were to walk out the door. Um, making sure that your customer and supplier contracts are solid and things like that. And then when you're getting into the 3 year period, then you're starting to get pretty serious about value enhancement and value creation. And then looking at options, making sure that, yeah, it's like I might want to sell it to these key employees, but is there something else? And then making sure that, that's being communicated as well, well ahead of time, because you don't want to have that surprise where you say, "Hey, I'd like to sell the business to you," and they're like, "Well, great, but we're not interested."
Yeah. Oh, do you
which
mean like if it's
happens.
employees?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always surprising to me. It's like, but like, does somebody really, sometimes people are employees because they want to be employees, not because they
Right.
want to be business owners.
Well, and I mean, I'm working with somebody right now, and it's she has the desire to start to transfer the business to her employees, but there's potentially some skill gaps.
Yeah.
So, what and it's not stuff that can be fixed in a quarter or two.
Hmm.
So you want to start to recognize, if you are, especially if you're going to do an employee transfer, that to make sure that, all right, well, what's there, but what's missing, and then be honest about it. And it's not, you know it's, what do they say, it's like all the right people on the bus and everybody on the bus in the right seat.
Hmm.
you know
Right
Not a bad
people,
thing to
right
be looking
seats.
at. Yep.
Yeah. So at what point does it make sense to engage somebody like you to do that initial assessment and to like start the process?
I'd say, depending on the level of seriousness, 3 to 5 years out is probably fine.
Mm-hmm.
10 years is, as I mentioned before, make sure that the business is running solidly. Look for the opportunities that are there. But if you're a 3 to 5 year out, having an assessment, I think, at least in your back pocket, and an informal evaluation would arm you with some knowledge, um, especially if something like an unsolicited offer were to come in, or a market opportunity, a chance to merge with somebody else. You might have your eye on a competitor in the space and say, wow, we could really do great things together. um, it's always good to have that assessment at least understood and in your back pocket, before making a big move. Either way,
Hmm.
even if you are potentially the acquirer, it's always
Yeah.
good things to know where the weaknesses in your own practice are.
Yeah. That makes sense. Earlier, you mentioned kind of some different options for
Hmm.
like what that exit could look
Yeah.
like. Let's talk
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, an employee purchase,
Hmm.
something like that, but kind of what are those maybe higher categories of
Yeah.
potential exit
Yeah.
opportunities?
Great question. Transfer to family obviously is a pretty popular one. Transfer to key employees, ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, which are very technical and way beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah.
Uh, but those are becoming pretty popular with private companies.
Hmm.
They give enormous tax benefits to both the owner and the company as well, potentially. And it's a good morale booster because it gives all the employees ownership and something to work for, and it tends to be a pretty popular thing. Um, there's also, private equity is out there. Venture capital is out there. So you can actually look at um, real big things depending on the business and the size of your business. One of the things that they talk about a lot is what's called a strategic acquisition, where you can actually get maybe a little bit higher multiple in the marketplace than you would normally, because you might have that secret sauce. You might
Hmm.
have that really gee whiz product in the marketplace that somebody else would really want, and it would be a massive compliment to their business.
Hmm.
So that would just be another company coming in and acquiring yours. Um, so those are kind of the big ones, and
Hmm.
just the broad categories. And of course, there's a million ways just to kind of like drill down and slice and dice how each of those get done. But those are the bigger categories. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've noticed this is kind of something that's happening, where this is a podcast for service companies, B2B
Hmm.
service companies. And, for a long time, it seemed like, private equity and venture capital were not really interested in services, but that has really changed
Yeah.
in the past couple of years. Like there's been a lot of private equity in at the accounting space. And then we're seeing it in engineering companies where kind
Hmm.
of people are starting to create these kind of maybe specialized niche larger firms, and they're gobbling up
Hmm.
smaller firms to
Yeah.
kind of support like bigger missions or bigger clients or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes services get overlooked with like thinking that there's a lot of buyers out there, but I just want to encourage people that like there are opportunities to sell. I don't know if you know the statistics though, Chuck, about how many businesses that go up for market actually, or go on the market actually do sell? I've
Yeah.
seen 25 to 30%. And I'm curious if
That's
you know.
Yeah, that's pretty close. The study that EPI will quote, and I'm going to just caveat it a little bit because it is a little bit older. Um, but yeah, it's around, three-quarters of businesses that go to market don't sell.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's a follow-on statistic where, and again, older, so, and there's not a lot of newer data on this, but owners that do successfully sell do have some regrets afterwards.
Mm.
And it's also a majority there. So, and that's why I tend to focus on the whole idea of what is it that you're going to do afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if you think about exit planning, I mean, what if you were to get an unsolicited offer, sir, and say, yeah, or unsolicited offer for your business and say yes, and then just take the check, cash it, and then do whatever without a lot of planning. There might be something in the back of your head. It's like, well, that was the first offer. Should I have done
Yeah.
that?
Right.
And I think that that's why, things like an assessment or an understanding and looking under the hood, what is there for your business is so important because, with any sort of transaction, there's going to be information asymmetry, right?
Yeah.
So, you want everybody to understand exactly what it is that what the asset is to be sold. And that's that's
Yeah.
that's why we're really big advocates for that.
Yeah. Understanding the value of what you have in that you've built, I mean, that you've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into, I think is like fair to you before you make any kind of decision. And, somebody
Right.
who is well versed in this can help you understand what that value is. Like my recommendation to small business owners is like, even if you're not really planning to exit traditionally of like you're going to sell it to somebody else or anything, is to build it like you could sell it, because then at least what you have is you have a valuable asset, or you have an asset that is extremely profitable. And then you can, potentially hire in a CEO, somebody to actually run the business for you. And then you don't have to sell your business. You just don't have to run it anymore.
Right.
Which is also a very good, um, lovely way to like,
Well,
you know,
exactly.
have your business, continue to work for you. I actually have a friend who is doing that, and he doesn't spend any of his time in his business. He still owns, 50% of it. And he just gets, profit checks cut to him. And that's not too bad.
Not a bad way. And that's a completely legitimate path of exit as well. Or
Yeah.
something like that where you sell off portions and they call it, kind of coming back for a second bite of the apple. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, you could bring somebody in, build it up more, you
Yeah.
haven't had to run it, and then you still retain ownership, and then somebody else swoops in as a strategic buyer or private equity or however that ends up working out. You get another chunk.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think it's like, by building the business like you are going to sell it, it gives you more options. And
absolutely.
I'm all about having options. It's like when you have a lot of cash in the bank, you have options,
Yeah.
of how you want to, run the business. You can invest in this, or you can invest in that, or anything. You've got
Yeah.
choices.
It's
Um,
always better make a choice when you can versus when you have to.
yes. Yeah. You don't want to be forced into like, well, this is all I could do. And this is the one buyer that's in front of me. I'm going to have to do this. And then, yeah, more than likely you will be really disappointed.
Yep.
You sold it. Um, well, for the businesses that I would say that probably 80% of the businesses that come to us when I ask them about their long-term goals, 80% probably say, yeah, I'd like to sell the business one day and have that be, part of my retirement. Um, when people say that, how do you approach a business owner with those kind of goals?
Um, well, certainly, that's when, kind of this cross-functional, this multidisciplinary type of practice comes into play. If a business owner doesn't have a financial advisor that they've got a really good relationship with,
Hmm.
uh, they need to get that individual, and they need to identify that individual early. Because one of the things that we talk about in our process is called the wealth gap. It's like, all right, well, here's what I need when I'm no longer becoming in or getting income from the business, and this is what
Mhm.
I have, and then
Mhm.
this gap in the middle is what we need to fill with to make sure that when we sell the business after tax, after fees, after proceeds, uh, we'll fill that. And identifying a financial advisor, who can help answer that question for you is really, really key. And it doesn't have, and as you mentioned, it doesn't have to be an outright sale. Maybe it's, setting up something where you get an income stream for life.
Mhm.
Um, but having that cross-functional team of people to be able to help you in all aspects, not just the business piece, but the personal piece as well, is just,
Mhm.
it's so key. And based on my experience, it's kind of funny because a lot of business owners, like, they tend to not have a lot of extra money to invest. They either roll it back into they typically
Yeah.
roll it back into their
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
So it's fairly common that business owners don't have a good relationship with a financial advisor until
Yeah.
they end up with that check. Um, so you know, even if they're not doing a lot of active investing, it's great to identify that person ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I would highly encourage anybody listening to get financial advising on earlier rather than later. It's a kind of an important thing for me because I have seen situations where, somebody could be putting all their eggs in their business basket and, hoping and praying and doing all the things, hoping that that will eventually become enough for their retirement. And then it turns out that that business either, dies down or doesn't actually have the value that they thought it would always would. And that can be a really, really, really tricky place to be where you're in your, retirement age, but you actually can't retire because the asset you thought you were relying on, your business, actually hasn't been growing.
Right.
Versus like if you actually had investments that were, keeping up with market, the markets over time or something.
Right.
So I just want to kind of encourage people that like, the money that you make in your business, and this is like me getting a little bit on a soapbox because it's an important thing for me. Like
It's a good soapbox.
yeah, the profits in our business should be used for personal gain as well, because as a business owner, you're earning those profits. You're having to report all those profits to the IRS as your personal income, especially if you're, taxed as an S corp or sole proprietor, and or even as a partnership. Those earnings are coming into you, and you need to take some of those earnings and invest them personally on your personal side, so that you can save for retirement. And there's lots of wonderful, tax savings vehicles and ways to invest for your future. And so we're going to have another guest on. I know I could ask you a lot of those questions, Chuck, but we're going to keep it to exit planning today. We've got
That's
another
cool.
guest to talk about some of the retirement planning options for entrepreneurs, but really, really important
Yeah.
to be
Well,
able to do that.
I'll pile on one quick thing too, is if you've got a business that you've been investing in and it grows and it's successful and it's providing an income stream, and you you might actually have an asset that could be a significant part of your own personal net worth.
Hmm.
And if you haven't done any estate planning or insurance planning or anything around that, then that puts that asset at potentially some risk.
Yeah.
So, that's why, even for business owners who might not have a lot of money to invest with a financial advisor, I mean, just please don't think of that. Think of, I've got an asset here that needs some sort of protection to protect my legacy and my family and my
Hmm.
future income.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. I like it. But yeah, gosh, I feel like I could ask you a lot more questions, but we are running out low on time. I want to make sure that we point people to your website so they can learn a little bit more about you. And you do have some resources. You have some blog posts, some videos,
Yep.
some things that people can go and check out. So the website is Cresscila, and that is spelled, so it's www.cresscila.com. And the name of your business is from?
It's if you take I took my daughter's names and threw all the letters in a big jumble and came up with a new word. And it wasn't trademarked and the URL was available. And I said, hey, we're on.
You got to take it. Yeah, you definitely have to take it when the URL is available and you don't, especially a .com, you got to
Yeah.
do what you got to do. And
Yeah.
it's easy to say Cressila. So,
Yep.
well, I have a class question for you before we
Okay.
go. So I was wondering, kind of being in your background and finances and everything, if you have any kind of favorite book that you like
Mhm.
to recommend to either friends or family or people you've worked with.
Yeah. Um, I there is one book out there. It was released, I think it was before the pandemic. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Um, it's an easy read. I think it's 20 chapters, 20 essays that, you could read in 5 minutes each, but it really gets to the heart of the psychology of money. Um, we used to joke as financial advisors, the math part was always easy.
Mm.
90% of it was being a psychologist because you are dealing with somebody's, wealth can be a very, very personal thing for a lot of people. And there's a lot of brain stuff, scientific term, that happens when you're dealing with a very personal asset for somebody. And I love some of the things that he says, because it just really helps bring a lot of perspective. One of my favorites is talking about playing somebody else's game. And this is
Mhm.
where, you hear the phrase, the thief of joy is comparison,
Yeah.
or comparison is the thief of joy, whichever way it goes. But it's like if you're at a cocktail party and someone's got, a couple extra zeros more than you do and they're giving investment advice, you're not playing their game. Play
Mm.
your own game. Don't play somebody else's. And I think that's something that I've taken, is just to make sure that, you know, I'm doing what's right for me, and playing my game and not
Yeah.
listening to what everybody else has to say.
Yeah. I love that book. I second that recommendation for sure. So many good takeaways. And it does not sound like a book that would be an easy read. You're like, oh, psychology and money. That sounds really like that's going to be like really
Yeah.
heavy. But it is very, very easy to get through and just like engaging, and
Yep.
a lot of good takeaways there. I think it's that book that talks about, and maybe it's around that same comparison chapter, but where he talks about how people might, somebody might be driving like a Lamborghini or something, like a really nice car. And they're not really, when I see that nice car, I'm not a car person, but like if I were to see that nice car and be like, ooh, I really like that car, they're not actually thinking about the person who's sitting in the car driving it and wanting to be them. They just want their thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where people who drive the Lamborghini, they're thinking, ooh, everybody's going to think I'm so cool because I'm driving this Lamborghini. But that's not actually what people are really thinking. They're just thinking, ooh, I want the Lamborghini. And they're not even thinking about the driver of the
Right.
car or putting them at a social status that is above,
Yeah.
themselves, maybe, which I thought was like a really interesting, just kind of reframing of sort of this,
Right.
the luxury comparison game that people, tend to get kind of caught
Yeah.
up in sometimes. But
Mhm.
whether it's like a house or it's anything that
Yeah.
you tend to care about. So
Yeah.
lots of really good takeaways from that book. So thanks for reminding us
Sure.
of that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for being a resource and sharing all of your exit planning brilliance today. I really appreciate it. And again, for people who are wanting to check it out, go to the website. And then are you active on LinkedIn or anywhere else that people can
I
get a hold
am.
of you?
Yep. Active on LinkedIn, except it's probably my real name, Charles, but
Okay. Charles
you can call me
McDonald.
Chuck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, Chuck, AKA Charles, thank you so
Yes.
much for being here today.
Hannah, I appreciate the invite, and it was great talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Financial Clarity Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about today's episode and click subscribe on your favorite podcast app.